Tonight, the House of Representatives votes to condemn racist remarks by the president, and yet the president, who claimed again today he doesn't have a racist bone in his body, continues to go after 4 women of color, all duly elected members of Congress. And the Republican, who is no stranger to criticism or press scrutiny, who is considering challenging the president in his own party on the economy. The reporter who broke this story standing by for us. And a towering figure of American law is gone 9 months from his 100th birthday. Tonight, how the story of Justice John Paul Stevens would be simply impossible in the America of 2019. All of it as the 11th hour gets underway on a Tuesday night. Well, good evening once again from our NBC News headquarters here in New York. This was day 908 of the Trump administration, and while there's no joy in it, one way of summing up today is this: our government's broken, our politics are broken, Washington is no longer functional, and the cracks in our society are deepening. Much of this day was taken up by the discussion of racist statements by the president. Then tonight came the news that had so many people thinking back to when we were different. The death just tonight of retired Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens at the age of 99. We'll have more on his extraordinary life and legacy later on in this broadcast. But first, to the news of this day. And tonight that includes a rebuke of the President of the United States, a vote of Congress to condemn him for telling 4 members of Congress, all U.S. citizens, to go back to their home countries. The Washington Post described the scene on the House floor earlier this evening, quote, "The imagery of the 240 to 187 vote was stark. A diverse Democratic caucus cast the president's words as an affront to millions of Americans and descendants of immigrants, while Republican lawmakers, the vast majority of them white men, stood with Trump against a resolution that rejected his racist comments that have legitimized fear and hatred of new Americans and people of color. Only 4 Republicans in the House voted against the president. Here they are: Will Hurd of Texas, Brian Fitzpatrick, Pennsylvania, Susan Brooks, Indiana, Fred Upton, Michigan. They all voted for the Democrats' resolution. Former Republican, now independent, Justin Amash of Michigan also voted with the Democrats. House Minority Whip Steve Scalise, a Republican of Louisiana, and Democratic Congressman John Lewis of Georgia each offered their own closing arguments shortly before the vote was called.
Rather than engaging in this constant barrage of personality attack that we've seen week after week after week, the American people expect us to be spending our time up here fighting for the issues they care about.
I know racism when I see it. I know racism when I feel it. And at the highest level of government, there's no room for racism. As a nation and as a people, we need to go forward and not backward.
We should probably add the obvious. John Lewis is an icon of the civil rights movement. This afternoon's vote was preceded by a raucous floor session which erupted after Speaker Pelosi openly called Trump's remarks racist. Republicans immediately moved to have her words stricken from the record. Along a party line vote, her words remained. Hours earlier at the White House, Trump continued his attacks on the 4 members of Congress for a 3rd day, repeating his grievances during a morning cabinet meeting.
It's up to them. Go wherever they want, or they can stay. But they should love our country. They shouldn't hate our country. I think it's terrible when people speak so badly about our country, when people speak so horribly. I have a list of things here. I'm not going to bore you with it because you would be bored. You wouldn't write it anyway. But I have a list of things here said by the congresswomen that is so bad, so horrible, that I almost don't want to read it. It's so bad.
President, how do you value to be able to criticize this country? Isn't that
Thank you very much.
The president also defended his attacks on social media, writing this: "Those tweets were not racist. I don't have a racist bone in my body. The so-called vote to be taken is a Democrat con game. Republicans should not show weakness and fall into their trap. Republican leaders seem to have taken that last line to heart. Today, they lined up to swear their unfailing loyalty and devotion to Donald Trump, even when the questions were a tad close to home.
You're married to an immigrant who's a naturalized U.S. citizen. If someone were to say to her she should go back to her country because of her criticism of federal policies, wouldn't you consider that a racist attack?
Well, the Secretary of Transportation came here at age 8 legally, not speaking a word of English, and has realized the American dream. I think everybody ought to tone down their rhetoric. The president's not a racist. And I think the tone of all of this is not good for the country.
Were the president's tweets that said go back racist? Yes or no?
No, I believe this is about ideology. This is about socialism versus freedom.
The administration's defense of the president's words started this morning with White House counselor Kellyanne Conway on Fox News.
They represent a dark underbelly in this country. Stop being so afraid of and adoring of four people who got here a few short months ago.
Not long after that, Conway reignited the controversy during an exchange with a reporter in the White House driveway.
If the president was not telling these four congresswomen to return to their supposed countries of origin, to which countries was he referring?
What's your ethnicity?
Why is that relevant to this
No, because I'm asking you a question. My ancestors are from Ireland and Italy.
My own ethnicity is not relevant to the question I'm asking.
No, it is, because you're asking about, he said originally. He said originally from. He's tired. A lot of us are sick and tired of this country, of America coming last, to people who swore an oath of office.
That's about how that went. And here for our leadoff discussion on a Tuesday night, Robert Costa, national political reporter for The Washington Post and moderator of Washington Week on PBS. Donna Edwards, former Democratic member of Congress from the great state of Maryland, now a Washington Post columnist. And Tim O'Brien back with us as well, executive editor of Bloomberg Opinion. He also happens to be the author of Trump Nation, The Art of Being the Donald. Good evening and welcome to you all. And Robert, I'd like to begin with you. Everybody at the White House okay with this? This is now a third straight day's news cycle taken up by this, or do they see this as an effective weapon of some sort?
An effective weapon, perhaps. They argue about the 2020 presidential race dividing the country. They know they have inflamed the nation's civic fabric with the president's racist tweets and comments that began on Sunday. At the same time, Brian, talking to my top sources tonight, Republicans in Congress and some even in the White House acknowledge that the president may have played a re-election strategy here, but he has jeopardized his congressional agenda. Still has to try to get the USMCA trade deal through. Still has to try to extend the debt limit. All of that up in the air as the Democrats move forward with this legislation, including with a few Republicans.
Donna Edwards, I need an honest answer. You're the only former member of Congress we've got to ask this question of. Are you surprised only 4 Republicans climbed over?
Actually, I was surprised and pretty saddened that that's true. I mean, the history books in the United States are going to record that the President of the United States was condemned by the Congress as a racist. And, you know, he may say he doesn't have racist bones in his body, but everything about what he's done, from the birtherism to the Charlottesville both sides to these current statements, really speak to his racism. And it's unfortunate that Republicans in Congress, more than just 4 of them and 1 independent, could not find their way to condemn the president's statements.
Tim O'Brien, we often have you on the air with a mutual friend of ours and a Pulitzer winner from the Washington Post, Eugene Robinson, because you gentlemen are so good together here in this studio. I want to show you Eugene's reaction on this network earlier today.
Go back to Africa was a chant from the segregationists who tried to keep students from integrating what had been previously all-white schools, who tried to keep public accommodations segregated for whites only. And that's essentially what the president has said, not just essentially that's literally what the president said to 4 congressmen, women of color. I'm not quite ready to go all the way to the political ramifications of this or that. It just has to be called out as unacceptable racism.
Tim, as the Trump expert here, so much can be done with a wink and a nod when you're a civilian. You can even question whether or not a president of the United States was born in Kenya. When you're president, the stakes get higher. To Eugene's point, is this bigger than we've played it, but just because life is like the frog boiling experiment? You know, I'm sitting here watching Kellyanne Conway on a sweltering hot day in Washington thinking, you know, they have an air-conditioned briefing room just inside that building, but we stopped using that.
And, you know, Kellyanne Conway, I think, who is usually fairly deft on her feet in terms of pursuing her agenda and turning these kinds of questions on her own interlocutors, started to go down this very slippery slope of questioning a reporter about his ethnicity. And I know where she was probably trying to take that, which was to sort of say we all have these inherent biases, we all come from somewhere else. But on a day like this, it shows how tone deaf, and I think almost to the, I would call it even hateful, this White House can be around this specific issue, which is the issue of race. And they are tone deaf and hateful because I think it's coming from the top. Donald Trump didn't start to claim that the Latino and black teenagers falsely accused of assaulting that woman were guilty. He always talks, even now, about people having good genes. There's a whole series of boxes you could tick off about what do we define racism by. And he ticks off every one of those boxes. When he did that as a private individual, I don't think people winked at it. He became, he was exiled in a lot of ways from New York life, from business circles and social circles. But as I think you correctly point out, as a private citizen and as a businessman, the radius of his damage was much tighter. He is now the leader of the most powerful Western democracy, and he's failing to overcome his past, and instead what he's doing is wallowing in the worst parts of himself, and racism is clearly one of those parts.
The aforementioned leader of the most powerful Western democracy has just employed his cell phone inside the residency of the modern air-conditioned White House. So great to see. This is, let's see here, 11:05, just as we were underway. So great to see how unified the Republican Party was on today's vote concerning statements I made about 4 Democrat congresswomen. If you really want to see statements, look at the horrible things they said about our country, Israel, and much more. They are now the top most visible members of the House Democrats who are now wedded to this bitterness and hate. The Republican vote was 187-4. Wow. Also, this was the first time since 1984 that the Speaker of the House was ruled out of order and broke the rules of the House. Quite a day. Robert Costa, you just reeled off the top of your head a list of the things not being done. It's an enormous list of things not being done. And when, in a city like this, New Yorkers watch the lights go out on a Saturday night, plunging the city into darkness, say nothing of the fact that the mayor's out running for president in Iowa. That's for a conversation at another time. It puts things like, I'll say it, infrastructure into the public mind and the public consciousness front and center.
And let's not, as a reporter here, put aside these Republican votes who supported the legislation. 2 of them, one, Will Hurd from Texas, African-American, a veteran. He said enough. He broke with his party. Brian Fitzpatrick, the key swing district, the Philadelphia suburbs of Pennsylvania, Bucks County. He said, I'm going to go with the Democrats in this. A former FBI agent, a retired FBI agent, one of the most competitive seats in the country. There are cracks in this party. Most of them, when I talk to them privately, they say, as Senator Sanders told me today at the Post, that they live in fear of the president because they need his political capital to win re-election in 2020. But they also know that they have to face history, and history will look back at these moments. But they say they have already swept along in this riptide ever really since not just 2015 and 2016, but 2011 and 2012. When everyone from Mitt Romney, now a senator from Utah, to other top Republicans accepted the support of a birther in Donald John Trump, then a businessman, who questioned whether President Obama was from this country. This kind of attack has been central to President Trump's political career for at least the last decade, making others, opponents, feel like they're not American and casting them in that way.
And Bob, how do they pass something that used to be just one of the things they did, like the debt ceiling, which is looming?
It's going to be very difficult. You have the Treasury Secretary and Steve Mnuchin essentially pleading with Congress to extend the debt limit. Now he thinks it's going to come up by September, not later in the year. You have the full faith and credit of the United States on the line. The markets, which have been spiked up, would be rattled by any kind of failure to extend the debt limit. But how in a Congress that is so on edge that you have them fighting on the floor of the House of Representatives about racism and the president, how can they get anything done? Speaker Pelosi, her top allies tell me, wants to get something done. She thinks she can get a budget deal, perhaps even before recess. But it's a challenge for her because she has so many Democrats now, because of the president's conduct, saying, enough, we don't want to deal with him on the debt limit or immigration or anything, we need to impeach him now. And that's what Speaker Pelosi's facing, those tremors in the ground.
So Donna Edwards, again, as our former member of Congress, could you make an argument that Trump has diluted the power of Congress to get things done, or is that too oxymoronic to withstand scrutiny?
No, I don't think so, but I do think that there's a reckoning coming for the Republican Party because they're not going to be successful. And, you know, the president drives this race baiting narrative because he sees it as a way, I think, to gin up his base so that he can hold on to that 35 or 40% going into the election. But it's simply not going to work. And I think that for the president, if he wants to get anything done at all that he can tout as an accomplishment, he's not going to do it like this. And I'm with the rest of Democrats. I'm ready to wash my hands of this president because he's just too slimy and he's just too dirty. And you know what? I wouldn't put it past him to throw up another distraction next week because he knows that Robert Mueller is going to be on Capitol Hill. And that, I think, is going to be a turning point in terms of the way that Democrats and perhaps some Republicans, maybe a handful of them, are going to be willing to deal with this president of the United States.
Tim O'Brien, I say this guardedly, but it's a related topic, and that is Jeffrey Epstein, who now may be the best-known sexual predator in the United States. This was today's NBC News reporting on it and what exactly they've recovered from inside his New York mansion. The passport, this other passport with his photo but a different name, was for personal protection in the event of travel to dangerous areas, only to be presented to potential kidnappers, hijackers, or terrorists should violent episodes occur. His lawyer, Reed Weingarten, wrote in court papers Tuesday saying that Epstein's Jewish faith and ample finances made him a target in the Middle East. In addition to the passport, federal agents found piles of cash and dozens of diamonds inside a safe in his townhouse. In court papers filed Tuesday, the prosecutors detailed the discovery. $70,000 in cash, as people do, and 48 loose diamonds ranging from 1 to 2.38 carats. I don't mean to laugh. None of this is funny. Question to you, having reported on guys like Epstein in this circle, how far does this go?
Well, the court obviously has reason to worry about Jeffrey Epstein being a flight risk because...
2 jets.
2 jets.
Couple of diamonds.
But, you know, if you want to get across borders, you have a lot of cash and you have diamonds. They can tell whatever story they want about the passport, but everything else in that safe speaks to someone who wanted to be able to get out of town quickly and not be traced. I think there are still 2 big shoes to drop in this case. The first one is, what is the Southern District of New York going to find in his files? Videotapes or photographs. You know, he had cameras all over his houses. So I think there's got to be a certain number of men who are worried about what that evidence might show. I think the other really interesting thing in all this, and it's still the big mystery, is how did Jeffrey Epstein make his money? How did he wind up being able to stick $70,000 in cash and diamonds into a safe for safekeeping? It's not clear to me that he would have done that only through bribing people about dirty secrets he might have on videotapes. I think there's a possibility that he ran illicit financial transactions for clients. He might have parked stock. He could have laundered money. This is entirely speculative. But the feds have said he made about $10 million a year, and he did that consistently over a number of years, and he had about $500 million in assets. That kind of money wouldn't just be popping in and out of his accounts if all he was doing was opportunistically bribing wealthy people. So if he is a more of a Bernie Madoff kind of character as this develops, there's also going to be a whole range of relationships tied to that could be also embarrassing for a lot of very powerful and wealthy people.
Exactly. That's the world we're living in. in July of 2019, with our great thanks to our leadoff guests tonight, Robert Costa, Congresswoman Donna Edwards, and Tim O'Brien. Thank you for starting off our discussion. And coming up, the surprise possible opponent who could try to take on Donald Trump in a Republican primary. Later, the voters will get to decide whether or not it's offensive to tell an American to go back where they came from. More on the issue of race in this 2020 campaign. And as we go to break, you may know the face. Former South Carolina governor and Republican Congressman Mark Sanford says he is mulling over a primary challenge to fellow Republican President Trump. In an interview with Caitlin Byrd of the Charleston Post and Courier, Sanford said he'll take the next month to think about a potential run. Says he wants to push the debate on the deficit and government spending, and says, quote, sometimes in life you've got to say what you've got to say, whether there's an audience or not for that message. I feel convicted. The Post and Courier points out that that Sanford would face huge odds against getting any traction with his own party. The South Carolina Republican Party chairman issued a statement that reads, quote, the last time Mark Sanford had an idea this dumb, it killed his governorship. This makes about as much sense as that trip up the Appalachian Trail. That, of course, a reference to Sanford's 2009 extramarital affair and the cover story for when he was visiting his mistress in Argentina. Sanford has been a frequent critic of President Trump. He lost his House seat after Trump endorsed his primary opponent in 2018, but then the seat ultimately fell to the Democrats. With us for more, the aforementioned Caitlin Byrd, political reporter for the Post and Courier newspaper in Charleston, South Carolina, and Anita Kumar, White House correspondent and associate editor for Politico. Hey, Caitlin, start with just an aside here. That quote didn't read right. Was it our reading, or is there something I'm missing? Why does he feel convicted?
He feels a lot of conviction. The quote is correct. He did say, quote, I feel convicted, but what he meant is that he feels a strong pull to do this, to find out in the next 30 days whether or not what he's selling in this political season, to use a phrase he likes to use down here, whether or not voters are interested in buying what he's selling, whether that's in the form of a 2020 presidential primary to President Donald Trump, or whether that's pushing forward with a think tank or some sort of an advocacy group to really push this debate surrounding debt spending, the deficit, and government spending.
And Caitlin, you know, you and I have both met politicians who just don't seem right if they're out of office, if they're not in office or running for office. And I won't ask you to make a judgment, but is anyone making a case that this is just ego and it may be something of a suicide mission?
Well, Congressman Sanford and Governor Sanford and I actually talked about this today when we had coffee, and he shared his plans to really explore this seriously in the coming months. And it's not about ego for him. That's what he tells me. For him, this really is not so much about going down with the ship. It's about fighting for what he's always fought for in the last 25 years that he's held political office. And to your point, to politicians who do seem out of place when they try to return to the private sector, we saw Mark Sanford go to Chicago and try and take that 25 years of experience in politics with him. But still, this drumbeat that just stuck in his mind, as he put it to me, it just lingered. And he's someone that if he can't shake it, he's going to pursue it in some form or fashion, and that's what these next 30-something days are going to be about, and I'm sure all of us are going to be counting down those days on the calendar to see when he makes a decision and whether it actually is going to be a serious 2020 Republican presidential run.
Anita, I noticed Sanford had an interesting media outing tonight with two Chris's, one named Hayes, the other Cuomo. Chris Hayes was trying to get him to acknowledge that deficits matter most to Republicans when the Democrats are in control of the government. Chris Cuomo was trying to get him to speak out against racism vis-a-vis Donald Trump. Both did not go smoothly or well. We do know about Sanford, Anita, that he is one of the button pushers for Donald Trump. I'm going to play this clip from Trump and talk about it on the other side.
Never liked him too much.
I wasn't a big fan. The Tallahassee Trail must be a beautiful place. Unfortunately, he didn't go there.
No, he didn't. A lot of people were wondering where the Tallahassee Trail was. We've checked with Tallahassee. They have trails, but no one specific trail is a thing there. That was the Appalachian Trail. What is it about Sanford and Trump, Anita, do you think?
Well, I mean, you know, President Trump doesn't like any criticism, and we can name some of those big critics on one hand, right? Jeff Flake, Bob Corker, Justin Amash right now. So Mark Sanford did not shy away from talking about him, talking about not just the issues they disagreed on, which obviously Republicans are going to disagree with him on tariffs and other things, but it was personality. It was when Congressman Sanford said facts didn't matter to President Trump, or that he fans the flames of intolerance. So those really, really got under his skin. And as you referenced, not only did he support his primary opponent, he supported her hours before the polls closed and really looked like he made a difference, right? Obviously he lost. So he felt like he had some, he punished him. He said what he wanted to say. So, I mean, those two definitely have a history here.
Good point. Both of our guests, terrific reporters, both have agreed to stick with us over the break. And coming up, the impact of the president's continued attacks on minority members of Congress specifically, the impact it's having out on the campaign trail when we come back. As you might imagine, the Democrats in the 2020 race have had more to say about President Trump's weekend tweets attacking the 4 Democratic members of Congress. During a campaign event in Iowa early today, Senator Kamala Harris called the comments vile, ignorant, and hateful. She addressed it again on CNN.
He wants to distract by starting a whole, lighting fires around the issue of race and ethnicity. It's disgusting.
Is this a turn? There's so much rage about this. Is this a turn for you?